This is Intelligence Matters, sponsored by Flare, a leader in providing actionable cyber threat intelligence to companies and governments around the world.
Eyal Hulata is a senior fellow at the Foundation for the Defense of Democracies in Washington. He is a former national security advisor in Israel. He served as national security advisor under Prime Minister Naftali Bennett and Prime Minister Yair Lapid. Eyal joins us today to talk about the momentous events playing out in the Middle East. We will be right back with that conversation after a break. I'm Michael Morell, and this is Intelligence Matters. The lines between geopolitical risk and cyber risk are blurring. Flare is a next-generation, continuous threat exposure management SaaS platform that equips corporate information security teams with world-class collection and continuous monitoring across dark web cybercrime forums, markets, Telegram channels, and sources of geopolitical risk. Flare sets up in 30 minutes, creates actionable intelligence from hour one, and is used by governments, security teams, and threat intelligence teams around the world. You can try Flare's free trial at their website, flare.io. That's flare.io. Welcome back to the show, Eyal. Great to have you again.
Thank you, Mike. It's good to be here. Good to see you again, and to the audience.
And lots to talk about, so let's get right to it. My listeners have been following the news. I know they have. That's what kind of listeners they are. So I just want to start by asking you, what has been accomplished against Hezbollah the last week or so, week to 10 days? How much have they been degraded, and what has all this meant for Iran?
So indeed, I think the headlines are all around Lebanon. So like 2-3 weeks ago, if we had this podcast 2-3 weeks ago, and you would have asked what are the prospects of Israel seriously engaging with Lebanon, I would probably say not that high, and that Israel was intended, to the best of my knowledge, to continue this more tit for tat other than going full in Lebanon. But then a few things changed. I think we noticed they're planning to be more aggressive on us, and then there was this unique circumstances where one of according to foreign press, right, one of Israel's capabilities were in a moment of either use it or lose it. I'm talking about the pagers operation, and once this was used, everything I think changed in the scene. Of course, the momentum started before that. There was this unique special operation in Syria and Masyaf, in a plant where they intended to build a massive production facility for long-range precision guided missiles. And for Chukur before that, who was the top military commander for Hezbollah, a sequence of things that happened. Then the entire leadership of Radwan that were taken out while they were gathered, to the best of my understanding, to plan a retaliation and to mobilize Radwan against us, and we preempted on that. And the last one, of course, is Nasrallah and his top commanders a few days ago in Beirut. All this together amounts to quite a substantial impact on an organization like Hezbollah. I mean, we took Hezbollah very seriously over the years. This is why so many of those capabilities were prepared to be ready for a time of war, which indeed we are already in war.
Yeah.
I think that the fact that almost the entire senior leadership of Hezbollah is wiped out makes it very difficult for an organization like Hezbollah to make strategic decisions and to evaluate the risk of what they will do. I think it's also difficult for them to communicate back to Tehran and make those decisions, because they're all used to doing this in a very specific way, through very specific people, in a very clandestine and compartmentalized manner. All that is out. right?
Yeah.
The Iranian attaché to Hezbollah was wiped out together with Nasrallah. He was there for a reason, right? He was there because they were coordinating together with the Iranians what to do after everything that has happened. So I think it's substantial. I think we have the upper hand. Could have also have an upper hand strategically if we choose to use it strategically. At the moment, it's a large amount of operational gains. I don't want to call them tactical because some of them are way more than tactical. But for this to become a real strategic achievement, we need to translate that into a set of arrangements that will bring security to the Israeli civilians for a long period of time.
Yeah, I want to come back to that because I think you've hit on something extraordinarily important here that might get lost, right, in this really amazing intelligence success and military success, over a very short period of time. That's where everybody's focus seems to be, but I definitely want to come back to that strategic point. In fact, this is been so spectacular that, historians are going to be writing about this for a long time. Just as they're going to write about, the failure in Gaza, prior to October 7th. So it's, very interesting cornerstones here to intelligence success and failures. I'm going to teach classes about this. So how do you see, Eyal, how do you see Israel's objectives in Lebanon right now? Sure, it's about getting, stopping that rocket fire, getting Israeli citizens to be able to go home, 100,000, I guess. But it also seems to be, much more than that. How do you think about what the objectives are?
So I think the question of objectives was valid before this couple of weeks, and of course now, because what was on the face of things said was to restore security and a sense of security to our civilians so that about 60,000 displaced people will go back to their homes.
60, yeah.
60,000. And of course, to do that meaningfully, there must be new conditions that prevent Hezbollah from posing an imminent direct threat on them, being able to, or prevent them from being able to engage into something that is remotely close to October 7, or to use their massive amount of rockets on us. So the question of how does that war end and what kind of arrangements could there be that will be significantly better than the ones we had after the Second Lebanese War, right? The so-called 1701 UN resolution that I think was well intended but was never honored or respected by Hezbollah. Was never verified by the international community. In fact, UNIFIL, that was responsible for making sure on the ground that Hezbollah does not violate it, was never able to do that. And Israel was pretty much left on its own to deal with that. Because Israel refrained from acting in Lebanon for so many years, to a point where I think for most of those years, Israeli leadership, Prime Minister Netanyahu mostly, was very worried that if we operate in Lebanon, they will start firing rockets on our civilian population, and we will be dragged down into a conflict that is very dangerous for the national security of Israel. But once we have a war, once this war started, and this was true before these 2 weeks, definitely now, we have conditions that can allow us to reach a more stable agreement.
This is that strategic point you were talking about earlier.
And what will that be? First, to degrade as much as we can from Hezbollah's personnel, missiles, infrastructure. Well, we've done a lot. Of course, there's a lot more to do. And I think over the course of the next days or weeks, we will see more and more of that happening. But that's only the first piece. Then there is removing Hezbollah from the close proximity to our border. I mean, the parameters of what Amos Hochstein has been negotiating have been out in the public for quite a while now. They're talking about moving north of the Litani River, which is about 10 miles or so north of our borders. The question, of course, is how do we verify that they don't come back?
Yeah.
And what do we do once we, because our intelligence will continue to monitor Hezbollah very closely, find out that they actually did go back and restore rockets and restore their infrastructure and continue to ship in long-range missiles and precision-guided and other techniques, maybe surface-to-air missiles next time, which they already have, but they can, of course, have much more. What will we do? What will Israel do? This arrangement needs to be built in such a way that it is clear that Israel has the legitimacy and the backing by the United States of America to respond preemptively when we find Hezbollah violating this agreement. We cannot wait for years for them to accumulate. We will need to act when it's small to prevent it from being big. This should be the major difference between the 1701 arrangement after the Second Lebanese War and to what will happen right now. Because there is no way this will go through a UN Security Council anyway, because I don't see anyone convincing the Russian, the Chinese to agree with the United States on anything at the moment. Israel will not rely on the Security Council for that. Israel will rely on the strategic partnership with the US. Of course, the French have something to say about it. Maybe the other EU3 countries can have something to do about it. But Israel needs to know that we have a freedom of action to act against violation of this arrangement once we find Hezbollah violating it. If we're able to do that, we can be in a completely different strategic position vis-a-vis Lebanon and the ability of Hezbollah to grow again to the threat they did a little bit less than 2 decades after the Second Lebanese War.
Yeah. Do you see the right people talking about that strategic piece, or is that missing?
Yeah. So, I mean, I think the question is more of intent than of capacity. There are enough people in the Israeli establishment who can negotiate that. I know what I would have done. This is similar logic to the kind of things we did when I was National Security Advisor. But, there are other people that can do that. And I think that the American establishment is willing to accommodate all of those concepts. In fact, to the best of my knowledge, this principle that Israel will have a right to act once there is violation has already been discussed between the US and Israel. So I don't see surprises there. The question is whether or not the Israeli premier, meaning Prime Minister Netanyahu, is engaging in a process that will lead to ending those wars or not.
Yeah.
And that question is difficult to answer at the moment.
Yeah. So what do you think the conversations are in Tehran about the last 2 weeks? This is a huge blow to them, right?
Yeah. So, we've both worked in intelligence organizations for so long. There is something very easing that I can answer that question without seeing any intel, right?
So absolutely. So no intel here. No intel here.
I can talk from my imagination and understanding.
Yes.
And I think that what's happening now in Tehran is a mixture of a few things. The first is we lost both our sword and our shield. And I'm sure they recognize that, right? I mean, they built this ring of fire around Israel in a mindset that this will cripple us from within. Of course, the war in Gaza is still waging, and I'm sure that they are unfortunately content with the rift between Israel and the US and the administration and the protests here and all over the US. Of course, this unfortunately gives them comfort. But I think that deep down, when they look into it and ask themselves, so are we capable of doing what we said we will do? The missiles didn't work well on April 13th, and we were able to defend against them together collectively, the coalition and the Israel air defense systems and good intelligence provided conditions for that. They were hoping that Hezbollah would deliver a huge blow to Israel. Well, I think what happened is quite the contrary. And Hamas is practically eradicated. I mean, of course, we will need to make sure that Hamas cannot rebuild its capabilities, and we need to have our hostages back, the live ones, and the guys that were murdered by Hamas. But Hamas as a military capability is not what it was a year ago. And I think even the Houthis, which have been bragging about their ability to hit Israel whenever they want, were not able to do that seriously. And in fact, it's been 2 quite significant Air Force raids that Israel has conducted in Yemen that performed our superiority over there. So I think the first thing that the Iranians must be telling themselves, what we prepared is not working the way we want it.
Right.
The second thing I think they're asking themselves is, what do we do now? Is it the time to capitulate for a while, right? I think they'll never capitulate, not with the level of pressure that is exerted on them. Is it the time to dash for the bomb because the political setting is right? Maybe the military setting isn't right, but the political setting is right. The Americans are not a real threat. The Israelis are bogged in two wars and not free to do as they wish against us. I'd be surprised if the Supreme Leader feels that this is the time to take such a huge gamble and to test what are the residual capabilities that we have and what is left in American resolve, even though you're close to elections, to prevent him from that. I think what is more reasonable is that they will try to wait it out. They will wait for us to make a mistake. I think they are dreaming of a ground invasion into Lebanon because they will feel that this will give them an opportunity to hit back through Hezbollah and to kill many soldiers and to get us bogged down without an ability to leverage the achievements, as I said before, into an arrangement. I think this is more likely to be a policy of Iran, and this is why my hope is that Israel will be smart enough to continue to play it safe via intelligence superiority and air force superiority, and not get involved in a ground maneuver that we know how it starts, not necessarily know how to end it.
Yeah, it sort of looks like a ground invasion's coming, though. When you look at the troops at the border and some of the special forces raids from the last few days, statements from the prime minister and the prime minister's office, it certainly looks like that's what's going to happen.
Yeah, that might as well be true. And I guess, maybe by the time this is aired, the audience already knows what happened over the next 24 hours, but I don't. And again, I hope that we're more sophisticated and strategic about our decision making at this point. With
the other point when you were talking about the conversation in Tehran about is now the time, to go for nuclear weapons. They're thinking about that first point you talked about, which is they've lost their two fundamental pillars of deterrence, right? Their vaunted missiles, basically feckless in April, and now they've lost. They're watching in front of their eyes the destruction of Hezbollah.
Right.
That's going to weigh on them. Is there anything else we can do at this point to mitigate the risk that they'll head down that road?
So I think there are a few things, Mike, that we need to do and to pay attention to. The first is, I'm sure you've been following this, but just to make sure everybody is following this. About 2 months ago, the DNI published their annual report about the status of the Iranian nuclear program.
Yeah,
I'm sure you being experienced in the wording of that, you must have noticed that the sentence that I'm sure was always there, that the American IC with sufficient confidence can say that Iran is not engaged in weaponization activities. Well, this year was the first time since the famous or infamous NEI report back in 2007, I think, that this line wasn't there. This line wasn't there.
I noticed that, and
yes.
I was part of crafting that sentence.
In previous years,
when I was in yes.
I think you and I may have spoken about this in previous years, because this was, I think, a major achievement that the Israeli intelligence community, the American intelligence community, mainly Mossad and CIA, were able to share, and NSA and ISNU, able to share deep intel that would allow both of the ICs not only to come to a conclusion, but also to agree on a conclusion of where Iran was standing with regard to the weaponization. I'm very worried that this sentence was left out. This is no mistake. It's not forgotten somehow. And to the best of my knowledge, this is not because there is no enough intel that would allow that to be written. In fact, there are signs that Iran is playing around or fooling around and maybe checking our borders to see what we will do. And I think we need to be all very worried about this, because even though Iran may still be weighing its risks and playing it safe, the fact that they are starting to take down a piece of the time that is substantial at the moment, a year, maybe more, in their ability to reach a nuclear weapon capability. If this clock starts ticking backwards, in a matter of time, it will put us in a very dangerous situation. And I think we need to be very worried about that and aggressive in it. I'm not in a position to propose American policy, given the fact that I work in an American think tank. We'll get to that in a second, maybe. But at least as it comes to Israeli capabilities, we definitely need to make sure that Iran knows that we're watching and that we're not going to wait until they conclude their capabilities. We'll be able to respond before that and to prevent them from being able to acquire such a capability.
Yeah, the sentence, the absence of that sentence worried me as well. And the two other things that worry me is Iran's a much closer relationship with Russia.
Yep.
And Russia's dependence on Iran for its war in Ukraine. And what will the Iranians ask for in return? And then the discussion about, there's a simpler way to make a weapon than a multi-point detonation system, and that's a gun type that we used, in World War II.
Yep.
So all of that, makes me worry as well.
I just want to remind everyone, when I was National Security Advisor, President Biden came for a visit in Jerusalem in the summer of 22. That was a remarkable visit. And among a set of achievements, the approval of the overflight over Saudi Arabia, a host of good things, President Biden delivered what was called the Jerusalem Declaration, which is basically a presidential commitment putting together a set of affirmations of U.S. commitments to the security of Israel. A lot of good stuff embedded in it. One of the sentences there is that the U.S. is committed that Iran will never have or acquire a nuclear weapon capability, and that it is prepared to use all of the national security powers to ensure that over time. That is the American commitment. I would want to think that the United States of America will stand by this commitment and make sure that this doesn't happen. Another sentence there that was very important is that the United States recognizes Israel's right to defend itself by itself. And that has a lot of meaning, as you know, very, very well, because it might come to a point where Israel is the one that needs to act towards that end. But we need to all to understand that if, God forbid, Iran becomes nuclear, this entire conversation we just had about what's happening in the Middle East, prospect of normalization, the sovereignty and stability of countries like Jordan or the UAE or Saudi Arabia will all be way more at risk if Iran is not only capable but also backed by what they call the means of deterrence. You spoke about the strategic corrosive relationship between Iran and Russia. There is also a strategic corrosive relationship between Iran and China. All of this will look differently if, God forbid, Iran acquires a nuclear weapon. And the nuclear arms race in the Middle East, a host of things that are dangerous, even before we ask the question, what does that mean for Israel per se? And I'm also worried about Israel per se. I don't want our enemies to have the capacity to fulfill their dream, which we know exists, to eradicate us and to end the homeland of the Jewish people. We cannot be in that situation. I'm very worried about that. And this is why I'm very worried about the regime of Iran itself. I think when you spoke before, you asked what more can be done. One thing, of course, is preparing for the ultimate need, maybe, to use nuclear weapon and to use a military strike to prevent them from acquiring a nuclear weapon. The second, of course, is to exert pressure on them, to push them to a position where they might agree to a better deal than the one that was before. But if all that doesn't work, we need to understand that as long as the Islamic Republic is led by this revolutionary regime, there might be no hope for the region and no hope for Iran. And this is a conversation the establishment's had over the years. The U.S. has been very reluctant to speak in terms of regime change or weakening the regime and so forth. And I'm not sure that Israel alone can do whatever it takes. But I'm talking about the need, not about the capability. We may come and reach the understanding that with this regime, there is no hope for a better future.
Well, the best way to make sure that they don't go down the road of developing nuclear weapons is to absolutely convince them that there will be a military strike to prevent it if that happens.
Right. And for that, there needs to be a credible military threat, which is something that I remember exactly the time where you were director of the CIA, and I remember the exhibitions and the discussions we had back at the time. I think one of the peak collaborative times ever between the Israeli IC and the American IC. I don't think Iran thinks there is a credible military threat posed by the United States of America at this point. And this is not a political statement, because I don't think they felt that during President Trump's period either. Even though eventually he did take out Qasem Soleimani, that was very significant and important. But a credible military threat to address the entire capability and infrastructure of Iran, I'm not sure they're worried about that very much. Israel needs to restore that sense of worry in Iran, and I hope that we're doing that while we speak.
Yeah. So one more question about Iran. I don't know if you saw this, but literally a couple hours ago, Prime Minister Netanyahu put out a video, and it was a video message to the Iranian people, and its intent was clear, to separate the Iranian people from the regime. And it wasn't stated as such, but it was a call for the Iranian people to stand up.
Yeah. Yeah, I've seen that. And I think the fact that this was put out now, there is significance in this, especially in light of what's happening in Lebanon. Because let's just move away from Iran for a second and talk about Lebanon for a second. Isn't this the time for the Lebanese people to regain control over their own country? Isn't it time now for the government of Lebanon, that for years have said they don't support Hezbollah, but it's imposed on them and there's nothing they can do? Isn't now the time for the Lebanese government and the Lebanese people to retake possession of Lebanon? Hopefully they will. Hopefully the international community will help them.
Yeah. That's only going to happen, Eyal, if the international community actually helps them.
I agree. And I think and because you're so right about Lebanon, this is even more important about Iran. The Iranian people, as you know well, when they fled to the streets of the Green Revolution 2009, all they wanted is support by the international community. And they didn't get it.
We weren't there.
And then they fled to the streets again in 2019, and they were massacred by the hundreds in a matter of days, and we weren't there. And then they fled to the streets in 2022, after Masa Amini was murdered in prison, and they fled to the streets for months, and we weren't there. The Iranian people despise the Iranian regime. They know that they deserve better. They don't support it. There is a huge young generation in Iran that would rather live in a liberal setting, a Western-prone country. They cannot do this on their own. There must be backing by the international community. And I think that the fact that Israel is willing to say that is important, but that will not be sufficient. Other countries need to be able to give this backing to the Iranian people.
Yeah. Without that international support, the outcome I fear in Lebanon is chaos. As you break down Hezbollah, degrade Hezbollah, there's likely to be chaos. And you'll remember better than I do 1982, when you invaded and you significantly degraded the PLO, and they were only saved by a ceasefire imposed by the UN. They had to leave the country, but Lebanon was left in chaos, and Hezbollah emerged. So, we got to be really careful here that we don't lose the war by winning the war. We are talking with former Israeli National Security Advisor Eyal Hulata. We'll be right back.
Beacon Global Strategies is the premier national security advisory firm. Beacon works side by side with leading companies to help them understand national security policy, geopolitical risk, global technology policy, and federal procurement trends. Beacon's insight gives business leaders the decision advantage. Founded in 2013, Beacon develops and supports the execution of bespoke strategies to mitigate business risk, drive growth, and navigate a complex geopolitical environment. With a bipartisan team and decades of experience, Beacon provides a global perspective to help clients tackle their toughest challenges.
So back to that strategy point you talked about, and back to this international support for Lebanon going forward? It's pretty simple at the end of the day. It's hard to do, but it's pretty simple.
I think there is a lesson there also for the international community and for the Lebanese in regard to what that is. Because if Lebanon is incapable of being an independent, secure state on its own, and this Iranian disease in them is crucial for their stability, that means that Lebanon is no longer a state, and it belongs to Iran. And if this is the case, then Israel needs to address Lebanon as an enemy state, and not Hezbollah as a hostile organization, and Lebanon as a safe haven for that hostile organization.
Right.
This is something we need to go about and think what that means, also from an international standpoint, also from an international law standpoint. What are the obligations for a government in a country? What are the constraints on Israel when we need to fight against such a situation? Israel has been criticized extensively about whether or not we're abiding by the international law, where in fact we're facing a condition or a situation or that was never designed or planned or comprehended by those who have built this structure called international law of war. Nothing even remotely close to what Israel is experiencing was thought, and it seems like whatever we do, it's used against us.
Yeah. So, Eyal, Israeli politics, where does that stand? Where might it go in the months ahead?
So we're talking about 24 hours after Netanyahu was able to widen his coalition by adding a party of four people led by Gideon Sa'ar, who will now join the war cabinet and be close to the decision-making process. Clearly a move by Netanyahu to strengthen his coalition. Some say maybe to position him better so that he's less dependent on the more extreme factions in his government. But maybe this is just his way to make sure that that the risk of early elections is removed and that it continue to be prime minister with this composition of the government until late in 26, where the 4-year term ends.
It could be both too, right?
And could be both.
Yeah.
Definitely could be. I think one of the things we need to all understand about Netanyahu is that he may think strategically, but he acts very opportunistically. And he's very good in creating more and more options so that he can make a decision at the latest possible moment and not before that. Sometimes even after the last possible moment. Sometimes he needs to be dragged to make a decision more than he is leading the way in this regard. But this, in any case, is the situation. Netanyahu, that about a year ago or after October 7 seemed like a part of the history of Israel politics, after a year was able to quite miraculously regain his basis of support and power and to fortify his government. And that is, I will say unfortunately, but that is the case at the moment.
Yeah. Let me finish up here, Eyal, by asking a couple of strategic questions. At least they feel that way to me. So you were the national security advisor to Prime Minister Bennett and Prime Minister Lapid. Had either one of them been prime minister on October 7th, how different would Israel's approach have been to the last 11 months, and how similar?
So that's a hard question, Mike, but a worthy one. I'll start by a personal note. I stopped sleeping properly on October 7 because of the question, what would have happened if I was still national security advisor? Was the establishment more attuned under our watch? Will we be able to pick up the signals and prevent this from happening? How better would have we responded when something like this started and so forth?
The day itself, you mean the day itself?
Yeah. And also the days afterwards. I mean, Israel was in complete chaos in the days after October 7. It took days and weeks until we managed to regroup not only militarily but also socially, all the social services to deal with the displaced people and the families of the hostages and those who were murdered and so forth. I think there are a few pieces of that I feel are important to say. The first is, when there is lack of trust between the leadership and the intelligence and security establishment, bad things happen. Bad things happen in the sense of the seriousness by which the politicians address or read the intel or the warnings given by the establishment. And that was completely a flaw on behalf of the Prime Minister and the cabinet. They did not take the establishment seriously. The second thing is that our enemies pick up those signs. I mean, we had about a year of extensive protests of the civilians, of reservists from the military against the judicial overhaul that Netanyahu was pushing so strongly. And we all know that our enemies picked up those signs and felt that this is an opportunity for them to attack, because Israel is preoccupied by other things, and maybe they did believe that the reservists won't come and that the Air Force won't be operational and so forth. Of course, all of that didn't happen, but the fact that we signaled that to our enemies is a danger in itself. You know, back in February of 23, almost all of the national security advisors in Israel over history, most of them served under Netanyahu, we all signed a letter to him, telling him that this lack of strategic focus and alertness on the national security interests of Israel will be dangerous and might give our enemies the false ideas. None of us envisioned October 7, but this was in February, 8 months before October 7. I want to think that all of that would have been substantially different in our government, because the way that I personally coordinated the interagency work and the interorganizational work during the time that I was National Security Advisor was completely different. And I think that they felt more trust and more willingness to share and to take risks in what they shared, because they didn't feel it will be used against them. Of course, you don't want the establishment to be shy of speaking truth to power, even when they are afraid of what might happen. But I think you also know that reality sometimes bites in this regard. This definitely happened in Israel. So that's one piece. So maybe we could have prevented it, maybe. I think that the ability to shape up fast and to deliver all of the services that the population needed would have been way better in the previous government, just because we were more attuned to that. But I have to add another note that unfortunately is the case. If Netanyahu was in the opposition when something like this happens, he would not allow any prime minister to be in office for a day, not to say a week or a month, before he would go with everything that he can against the prime minister, saying that this government has failed and they have no authority or ability to continue to conduct their role as a government. Of course, this didn't happen in reverse. The opposition to Netanyahu was not even mildly aggressive with him with that. On the contrary, Gantz and Eisenkot joined his war cabinet days after they started to assist to the best they thought they could in this condition. So, you know, the political aspect of this is very, very difficult to judge. And we'll never know.
Yeah. Second question, Eyal, is when I hear Israeli politicians talk about the future of the region, Israel's role in it, I hear a lot of what they don't want. You know, you don't want Hamas. You don't want Hezbollah. You don't want the Palestinian Authority. I don't hear a lot of what do you want, right? Particularly as it relates to the Palestinians. And, you know, you and I have talked about this before, and I know there's different views in Israel on this question. But how do you think about that? How do you think about that? I mean, it doesn't seem to me that there's anybody out there thinking about what this region needs to look like, and anybody being strategic about it in a sense that it's not just narrow self-interest that they're focused on, but the broader self-interest, I guess I would say.
So I think, Mike, that the fact that everything is being politicized so easily now makes it very difficult to talk about what will bring us hope. It's much easier to talk about what we hate.
Yeah.
But I will accept the challenge and give you at least a broad stroke of how this should look like. There are two conflicting forces in the Middle East at the moment. There is the extreme radical faction led not only by Iran but also by the Islamic Brotherhood that wish to turn the region into an ideological, extreme religious region that is moving backwards in everything that we all believe in.
Yeah.
Prosperity,
and a region with no Israel,
freedom,
and no United States.
Yeah, but not only no Israel, no monarchs, no secular leaderships, no rights to people, no rights to women, no rights to anyone, right? I mean, it's like the difference between Egypt led by the Islamic Brotherhood of Morsi and President Sisi.
Yeah.
Is Egypt
right?
or Taliban in Afghanistan, or ISIS in Iraq, right? Is everything better without them? No, but is it worse with them? Definitely. So this is one sketch or force that is trying to take over the Middle East, and across of it is a pragmatic viewpoint that is led. Of course, Israel holds this pragmatic viewpoint, but not only us. I think all of the Abraham Accord countries have joined it because they share this idea that prosperity and an openness to the world, to the West, but also to India and to trade and to science will provide a better future to their people. And this is the core, I think, of the architecture, of the pragmatic architecture that my hope is will govern the Middle East. Now, I don't want to push aside the Palestinian aspect because you asked it, and for a good reason, because Hamas, I think, is a representative of the radical faction that I said before, and the Palestinian Authority should have been a representative of the more pragmatic aspect of the Middle East as we've seen it. But I think it's very weak in its ability to do so. They will say that they're weak because Israel weakened them. And I will have to admit that Israeli governments over the years have not done enough to support or to promote the pragmatic factions in the Palestinian society so that there will be some kind of ability to reconcile the differences without compromising the security of us as Israelis, but also by providing them the security that they need and the ability of self-governance that they need. Are we able to do that at this point? Well, I think this is the challenge that we will need to try to strive for. I think that the ability to do that with a shadow of Iran over it is very difficult, maybe impossible. Just look at what Iran is doing to Jordan. Jordan may collapse in a matter of months because of Iranian malign influence within it. And I'm not sure that everybody is paying attention enough to the dangers of that. We definitely need to cut this influence of Iran from the radicalization of the Palestinians so that we can have a prospect of something different. But I'm hopeful. I'm hopeful that the spirit of the Abraham Accords, that the joint understanding of a set of pragmatic countries and a set of pragmatic leaders that understand reality differently, that understand the danger of the Iranian regime, of the radicalization of political Sunni Islam. I think there is now, maybe after October 7 and after Israel will end this in a position of strength for a change, to lead a movement that will say this is enough. We cannot allow this to happen to Israel. We cannot allow this to happen to any other pragmatic country in the region. And we need to stand together with the support of the United States of America and to stand against evil, to stand against radicalization. This, I'm sure, in turn, in time, will have a positive effect also for the Palestinians, but it not necessarily needs to start for the Palestinians. We cannot overlook it, we cannot neglect that, but we need to focus on the real problems. And unfortunately, at the moment, it lies in Iran, in the revolutionary regime of Iran, and to the extreme poison that they are spreading all over the region.
Eyal, thank you so much for joining us. I could talk to you all day. It's obviously incredibly important stuff, but thank you for taking the time.
Thank you so much.
That was Eyal Hulata. I'm Michael Morell. Please join us next week for another episode of Intelligence Matters.
Intelligence Matters is produced by Steve Dorsey with assistance from Ashley Berry. Intelligence Matters is a production of Beacon Global Strategies.